All right, hello all of you designers and players out there. This video is going to cover the grand unified theory of game design. First, I'm going to kind of give a little intro here as to why this is important and kind of the impact of this. Then we're going to go through this complete discussion here of all the bullet points you see. And then the last part is going to be kind of questions about the future and how to proceed. And if you want to watch the What is a Game video, this goes over the exact same theory. It just kind of more covers it in comparison to other entertainment genres, sort of what happens when you take out one of these things or more. Then you'll end up with some other kind of product that makes it not a game. And in some cases, you could end up with a toy, or you could end up with a sport, or you could end up with a movie or something else here. But when you have all of these things together, it makes a real game. Although in this video, we are going to talk about some things that happen when you violate these things. Not just when you leave them out, but when you do them wrong. And so to explain a little bit more here about why this is important, for example, some video games would be better classified as video puzzles. This may seem like an arbitrary distinction, but it's not. It's like the difference between a dry chicken breast and a Wagyu steak. Yes, they're technically both meat, but one definitely tastes better. Also, in this scenario, the Wagyu steak is free while the dry chicken breast is $100 a box and has the nutritional value of sawdust. Not games are not worth playing. There is no reason to play or buy not games. And right now, that's all games that have ever existed on the market, except for Mage War. Violations of real game design undermine its play integrity and enjoyability. Currently, Mage War is the only real game on the market, and it will always be available for free. Every other design in history, again, is a not game. From chess to Dungeons and Dragons, whether it's Pong or Halo, everything. This video, though, is not to sell you anything. Its only purpose is to inform both designers and players what a real game looks like and how to make one. I'll try to leave the fixing of games to other and future videos. I have done some detailed analysis on how to fix Magic the Gathering, and I may talk about some of those topics here in this video, but I'll try to kind of leave those to other discussions and just talk about the theory itself, both for players' sake and designers' sake. Just to kind of like leave out examples that may not be clear if you don't know what that game is or something. So, I'll try to avoid that. So, yeah, that's a really big deal here, is that because this actually explains what a real game is, actually how to make a complete real game, it's not just that everything else is just less fun or there's some kind of quality of life improvement that you get here. We're actually going to see that when you violate real game design, when I said it violates play integrity, I mean it actually or undermines play integrity. It undermines the actual design of the game. And any kind of fun anyone is having is really just an illusion until they kind of dig far enough. And the best example to point to is just tic-tac-toe. That's the one that everybody knows. When you first learn to play tic-tac-toe, it's entertaining for a few minutes. And, I guess depending on the age that you are when you learn it. And then you very quickly figure out that anybody who knows how to play the game, playing against you, especially now that you know, is always going to end in a draw. There is no way to win tic-tac-toe. There's no point to play. And that's kind of like a microcosm of what this reveals for every game in history. This really obviously shows why it's not worth it to play anything that we've ever seen. That's also why the end of this video is going to be talking about kind of how to move forward and like what to do and what this might mean for the future. So now let's just get into the actual theory here. We're going to go through all these bullet points, and we're going to see both what they mean and some examples of what happens when you get them wrong. So a real game, and this is like a complete description here. You could try to like boil this down, but this is boiled down. This is the complete definition of a game. So a game is a competition with victory conditions that is fair and balanced, immersive, requires strategy to win, never takes away a player's agency to participate, and allows them to customize their strategies, lacks real-world relevance, is neither a simulation nor solvable, and its victory conditions cannot be random. So, going from top to bottom here, at its core, every single game is and needs to be a competition. This doesn't mean that role-playing games aren't games. It's more a commentary on how you need to run stories. Stories involve conflict, and when you're playing a role-playing game, it's sort of the hidden lie that role-playing games don't tell you, is that in order to actually get any use out of them, you first, of course, need your GM, which isn't a lie, but the lie is they're not telling you that GM actually needs to be a person who naturally understands storytelling. Otherwise, the game's going to be very mediocre, if not unplayable. You need somebody who's good at storytelling to be the storyteller, and then, of course, you also need your players to understand what it is to be a character, and to sort of get that they're running that main character in the game. It's a difficult concept to get right, and they don't tell you these things so they can sell more games. But at its heart, a role-playing game is absolutely a competition because it is the playing of a story. So because stories involve conflict, that easily ties in and allows role-playing games to have, combat mechanics and things that really give you strategy. So without going too far off the rails here, every game needs to be a competition. When it's not a competition, you get something like a puzzle, or just an activity. Like in the Mark Rosewater article, he describes kind of hitting a tennis ball against his garage door with a racket to practice. That's not a competition, and it could have, or whatever you're describing, could have all these other qualities, but if it's not a competition, then it fundamentally is not a game. So a game needs to start with being a competition. And part of the definition of a competition here is having victory conditions. That is sort of the bounds of the competition. This is how you kind of define iterations. This is how you define sequences. This is how you define progression in some cases. And so the bounds of your competition need to be set with victory conditions. You don't have to have just one. Maybe you can have multiples. Maybe it's important, like who gets the most, or maybe it doesn't exactly matter like who wins, but you're trying to rack up certain victory conditions each time. We can get to discussions about that later as we get to agency here, but you shouldn't be limiting those. But victory conditions shouldn't be a limiting factor. They should be simply the bounds of the game. In order to have a game here, we also need our mechanics, the actual playing out of that competition, to happen in a way that is fair and balanced. And these are related topics, but they're not exactly the same. Fair means that gameplay can't favor any one strategy over another, or can't always favor one strategy over another, or any strategy over another. It means that when you're designing your mechanics, you need to have everything fleshed out enough that there isn't a reason to choose, especially one strategy all the time in a mathematically competitive sense, that you're always going to win if you choose this strategy. That's not a fair game, because anybody else who chooses something different is going to be at a disadvantage. Um, this then also means that it relates to balance, and this is where the two connect. But balance isn't necessarily things that are fair. You can have unbalanced mechanics that are fair. Everybody can have unbalanced mechanics, and that's fair. But it's not a balanced game, and that ruins the integrity of the actual gameplay. Balance is making sure the math of your game is sound. So this is making sure that you don't have things like infinite combos, or first turn wins. For tabletop games, I'm talking less for video games here. Although all of this applies to any genre of game, whether it's tabletop or video or anything else we've never discovered yet. So balance is having to do more with the math. That's making sure that that the actual math of your mechanics, the way things work out, is balanced between strategies and individually. That they're not themselves broken or broken in relation to the competition that you're setting up here. So for immersion, previously I think I worded this as entertainment, but I think a better word is immersion. And your game needs to be immersive, and this needs to be sort of the aesthetic of the game. And here I've written down some notes here. So I guess this is for breaking immersion. I'll get to that in a moment here. But so immersion can be at kind of various levels of abstraction. The two examples I like to contrast here is Cards Against Humanity versus Magic the Gathering. Cards Against Humanity focuses on immersion by wordplay and comedy. You're getting to choose which cards you play, and you're trying to find funny combinations. And I forget if there's a voting mechanic, or if you all put forward suggestions, and then the person chooses which is the best. But it's very interactive, and it's very immersive, because it's all having to do with generating these funny concepts, these funny word plays. And you don't need artwork for that. It's really just words printed on the cards. I mean, there's some perhaps pleasing graphics design sort of layout on the cards, but it's much different compared to Magic the Gathering, which is very visual based. It's very visually aesthetic in terms of providing artwork, and especially in the beginning, there was so much flavor in the card frames and the hand drawn artwork. There wasn't very much digital artwork, and so it was very, very immersive. And even still, the backs of the cards today, despite the fronts looking very different, the backs still have that old look. And it's not to say so much that graphics are the most important thing, or that appearance is everything to a game. Certainly you could have an extremely good role-playing game that lacked artwork because it is theater of the mind. Even though a good rule book should have some artwork to it. But the mechanics of the game need to be immersive. So it's not just that you need to focus on the visual appeal. Magic the Gathering is an immersive game in its gameplay. It is immersive. It does do that well. And even its artwork kind of goes to some extent to keep that in. Like, you won't find certain types of artwork that might break you out of immersion. I think one of the really early rules was it was like after one of the gosh, what was the card's name? Something Assassin, Royal Assassin. Yeah, after Royal Assassin, I think they made the rule that there should never be any English letters or Earth letters from languages from Earth, I mean, in text on magic artwork. So from that point on, if there was ever any text, it was in some fictional script that the artist made up, and that helped keep immersion. So some of those rules were implemented, but the gameplay itself, like Cards Against Humanity, focuses on, like there aren't extra mechanics that don't have to deal with having fun and laughing about funny phrases. Like there isn't a mechanic that says, okay, now put down your cards and go watch the news for 5 minutes. Whereas, and here we get into breaking immersion, something like The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, whenever you open up a treasure chest, there is a completely unnecessary animation that you can't skip. You have to watch. The gameplay stops, and it's an animation panning around the treasure chest of Link opening it up and then holding up the item. And Egoraptor does a great video on this, but the note here that I wrote down about breaking immersion is that it has no game value, and a game should be free of anything that doesn't have game value. And later on down the list here, we'll see this is the same for simulation. Simulation has no game value, and that's why a simulation isn't a game. But I guess we'll move on here to requires strategy to win. And this ties into the next point here. We're going to kind of tackle these together, is requires strategy to win, and it never takes away a player's agency to participate and gives them customization of strategy. So customization of strategy is essential. And I, in previous videos, have expressed my personal preference for universal systems, but I don't want to confuse people. You can have a real game that is very heavily flavored to a specific genre or subgenre or setting of some kind, and it can still be a real game. My preference for universal systems really is just a subjective preference, but regardless of the game, it needs to have customization of strategy for its players. And this is part of being fair, is if you are designing a game and your players can't customize their strategies, go back to fairness and look at your competition and ask yourself, have I fully fleshed this out? Have I really given my players all of the options to explore and immerse themselves in this game? And if you haven't, well, then you have some more work to do. Flesh your game out some more. And never taking agency away from players is meaning it's part of breaking immersion. It's part of agency. This all ties in. It's like the Zelda example. They're stopping gameplay to have you watch an animation. There's no reason for it. It's breaking your immersion because you're not watching your gameplay opening the item. You're watching an animation. You can't run around. You can't do anything about it. You can't stop the animation. You have to wait for it to play. And this is taking the player's participation away from them. And we'll also say a little bit more about this when we get to simulation. But if you take away your player's agency, then you're stopping the game. It is no longer a game. And while your player can't participate, you're doing something else. And that's bad design. Don't take away your player's agency. And if you've limited them, then you're taking away customization of strategy, and you're also breaking your game. This is why I don't like class systems for RPGs. I don't like that Dungeons and Dragons forces you to play classes. It takes away customization of strategy, and it limits your ability to build the character that you want. And so much of that also breaks immersion because it forces you to focus on the mechanics that, at the same time as we get again to simulation here, sometimes do more to simulate something than they have purpose as fun game mechanics. They are neither meant to be immersive, which isn't the same as simulation. I should really point out here. Um, Immersion can't be at the expense of player agency or customization of strategy or undermining the competition or anything else. Um, but your game needs to be immersive in the sense of entertaining. Uh, Getting back to player agency here without taking that away. And I think I probably lost a train of thought there, but customization of strategy is essential. And so when you're designing a game, you can never take away a player's agency or give them a game where they can't customize it. You can still have something highly specialized, like whether it's like, let's say, like an old Western game, or whether it's like a campy 50s sci-fi game or a horror game. Um, you can have these highly specialized games like Ninja Burger or something, uh, which actually is a great example. I mean, much better than Dungeons and Dragons. In Ninja Burger, even in the first iteration, you could customize your ninja from top to bottom. You could build whatever ninja you wanted, um, and somehow Dungeons and Dragons doesn't let you do that. Um, but to another extent here, having over specialized games can also be sort of a problem, because to some extent, when your game is less universal in its playability, the enjoyment of that is limited, because in some ways you are taking agency away from players, and in some ways you are sort of breaking immersion to keep them in that little sandbox, which needs to be a bigger sandbox, because those players or those characters, that experience should have more mobility. Otherwise, it can only be in that small context. If you, and this comes up here with lacks real world relevance, which is our next topic, which I guess is a good segue. When you are limiting the access of your game, or you're making it have real world relevance, it's no longer a game. You're turning it into something else. Maybe you're turning it into a pay to win gambling experience. Maybe you're turning it into a sport. Maybe you're turning it into a hula dance. I don't know what, but uh, a game needs to lack real world relevance. And when you break some of these things, it violates a whole bunch of other things too. And the example that I always come back to is Magic the Gathering, where it's a pay to win gambling scam. Uh, it is completely 100% solvable, broken. I've published the break here. My break applies to all trading card games, by the way. And this is because Magic is imbalanced. It's designed imbalanced. It goes all the way back to the beginning of the list here. And because it's imbalanced, it means that whether they intended or not, they're going to print certain cards that are going to make their formats solvable. And that means those cards are going to become the most expensive. And so no matter what format you play in Magic, it's always going to be pay to win. The decks are always going to be solvable. Even when they have, a really aggressive ban list, it doesn't matter what they do, because fundamentally their game is imbalanced. The cards are not designed balanced. And the end result is their game no longer lacks real world relevance, because now it's pay to win. Now it's solvable. Now it's no longer a game. You don't need to play because you have no agency anymore. You can't choose how to customize your strategy. They've already decided what the best strategy is by printing a broken game. That's unfortunately not a simple explanation, but that is the explanation there. There's no reason to play Magic the Gathering because it's not a game. Just like there's no reason to play a sport and call it a game because in a sport, it doesn't lack real world relevance. Your physical capabilities determine your success in that game. That's why sports are professional. That's why you can't just wake up in the morning and say, hey, I want to play professional football. Well, good luck. That's probably not going to work out, because in order to play professional football, you need to be very, very big and very, very agile. And you need to be able to put in the practice. You need to have the endurance. I mean, you need to have a whole lot of qualities that are going to wash out like 99% of the population in order to get on that field. That does not lack real world relevance. That is not a game. And so that's kind of the explanation there. But this can also refer to video games. You know, so many video games, like, puzzles that are masquerading as video games. A lot of sports masquerade as video games, like fighting games are not games, they're sports. Your twitch reflexes, like for Super Smash Bros., your twitch reflexes determine your success in that game. And even worse, it could lack more real world relevance because the controller you're using could determine your success in that game. The game is so finely tuned, your twitch reflexes matter so much that, and there's so little margin of error that you can actually get an edge by having a better controller. That's not a game. And this also then, I guess, segues pretty well into these last two bullet points, which I'm also going to tackle together here. A real game is neither a simulation nor solvable, and its victory conditions cannot be random. When you have a simulation, you're adding in all of the things that are from the real world that have no game value, that are only there to simulate reality. They're not there to be a game. You can maybe enjoy them. There could be an aesthetic to it. It could be entertaining. It can certainly be immersive. But if it's a simulation, then it's taking so much agency away from you, and it's having you do all of the things that you have to do in the real world to simulate it, but it has no place in the game because a game doesn't need to include all those unfun parts. Just like, a writer who writes a boring story, dear writer, you can write literally anything. Your job is to put any sequence of words together on a page that are exciting to read. If you write a boring story, you have failed. If you make a game that is a simulation, or that includes too much simulation or any simulation, you have failed at making a game because what you're making is a simulation. A game is fun. A game lacks real-world relevance. A game allows its players to customize their strategies. It gives them agency to participate and never takes that away, much unlike so many things that are in the real world that you are, I'm sure, simulating. And it requires strategy to win. Now, simulation probably does require some strategy to win, but it violates quite a lot of other things. And certainly for simulation, you could run into matters that are unfair, certainly unbalanced. It's pretty easy to do that. There's a lot of tweaking I see that shooting games have to do. And getting here to the next part, solvable. So a real game can't be solvable. Magic the Gathering isn't a game, and I just explained this, because it's solvable. There's no reason to play it because you can solve it. There's no reason to, for instance, play poker in a way, or blackjack, I guess. Poker may apply to the next one here. Because you can actually count cards. It's solvable. Now, I'm sure that's kind of discouraged in a way, but really, if you were playing it like a video game, if you were playing it, to your best ability, to be as competitive as possible, you would play it just like Magic. You would just solve it. You would just play the best deck. You would spend the most money, and you'd win tournaments. And unfortunately, I see a lot of the next part here in a lot of games too, is that a game or victory conditions in a game cannot be determined randomly. This is Candyland. And essentially right now, I think, you know, you could say a lot of games out there count as this. But the simple explanation is that there's no reason to play Candyland because your decisions in the game do not matter. By making the outcome random, they have completely stripped their players of agency. Their choices do not matter. It does not require strategy to win. The only thing that determines who wins in Candyland is when you shuffle the deck. After that, you could flip over all the cards and see who's going to win. Because there's no choice that any player makes in the game. I think there's maybe like that one like shortcut that's always the right choice. Like there's no reason not to take it. There's no mechanics in the game that make like give you that choice. It's like you could take longer to get to the end or shorter. That's that mechanic. So you always choose the shortcut. Your choices in Candyland don't matter because the outcome is random. Your choices in Magic the Gathering don't matter because it's solvable. Neither of these are games. And I guess now that I've gone over all of these here, we can start to talk maybe without kind of fixing them, going over some other things. So my break for trading card games applies to all trading card games. Although I've talked about it primarily for Magic the Gathering, it applies to Yu-Gi-Oh! I published the break before Flesh and Blood and MetaZoo were printed, so both of those were printed broken. You could solve those right now using my system. Same thing for, Final Fantasy or Digimon or, anything. Pokemon. Like, all of these games are imbalanced. They're pay to win. And you can break down the cost of every card in the game and solve any of the various formats they might have. Board games are completely discounted from the discussion of games because no board game can qualify as a real game. The design of a board game is to be limited. It is to take away player agency. It is in so many ways to, be a simulation or have the outcome be random like Candyland, or sometimes lack real world relevance. So many other violations here that are almost inherent to the genre. No board game can ever be a real game. As far as I can tell, aside from genres that have not been invented yet, the viable genres are video games kind of at large here. There's a lot of design space in there. RPGs, I think. Trading card games can definitely be fixed. I've explained how to fix them. And miniature games, I'm not sure. I'm kind of iffy on that. There could be some, but I think I actually want to do a video on that at some point, kind of going over my thoughts about miniatures games, but you can solve and fix trading card games, just make them balanced, really. For role-playing games, I would say focus on teaching storytelling, focus on customizing of strategy. You don't have to have a universal system, but if your players can't customize their strategies and if you're taking agency away from them, and if you're trying to over simulate things, if you're doing things for the sake of simulation and not because it is either a customization of strategy or, an instance where a player, can employ strategy and participate, if it's not for the sake of fairness and balance, leave it out. If it's something that's not for the game, if it's not something on this bullet list here, leave it out. Chess is included in board games. Chess is solvable. Chess is not a game. Backgammon's not a game. Any game you could play with like poker cards, not a game. Just let me look at my notes here, see if there's anything else I should mention. So I guess I went over. Yes. Also, for lax real world relevance, I think I wrote down memory mechanics. Sometimes those come into play. Yeah, with randomness there. Let me see if I got immersion. Yep, mentioned that. So I guess kind of before we go here to the last part, I think I had a good thought. Is that without knowing how to design a real game, all designers are left with is cynical design that has no value to players. That's why every game is cynically designed. For me, looking through Magic's design and actually from a design standpoint, looking at it and looking at all those choices, it's actually kind of unsettling how cynical some games are made, whether it's Magic the Gathering or video games or board games too. I think board game designers are very well aware that they're not designing games. Maybe some of them just can't quite put the words to the thought. And that's why this is so important here. It's so important that designers understand how to design real games, because right now it's a market of volatility where no one in the industry knows what they're doing. There's no set template. There's no standard. This is the standard, by the way. But outside of this video, no one's ever seen this. And I don't know if anybody's offering game design degrees, but no college should be offering game design degrees, because any such degree, especially now that I published this, is going to be a fraud. But you don't need a degree to get this. Game design isn't complicated. I think I mentioned this in the last video here. To boil all this down, do right by your players. This is how you do right by your players. And when you can do this, you give them an experience. And players watching this, evaluating all the games that you think are good, you can actually see how they break some of these things. It gives players something better. It actually means that you have real collectible game assets. Right now, no Magic card is worth anything. I mentioned this in the How Magic is Scamming You video at the end. There was quite the quip. Yeah, even a Black Lotus is virtually worthless. Its value is only maybe historic. If you cataloged all of the games that have been popular so far throughout history, you could say these are all the things we designed before we figured out how to design games. These are all the ways we figured out how to make ourselves suffer. These are all the ways that we got scammed. And I guess for that reason, maybe somebody would want to buy it for a collection of that. But no Magic the Gathering card is a collectible game asset because it's not a game. Same thing for Yu-Gi-Oh! Same thing for any kind of collectible video game. I mean, although I think there's a lot more precedent for video games to be collectible because it's technology. It is quite a bit more archival. Actually being able to have those ROM chips, the original ROM chips and everything. And you know, for Magic, there is a lot of value in the artwork, but I think it would be interesting if Magic the Gathering cards started to be evaluating as art pieces rather than game pieces, because that is their true value. The most beautiful cards are like, you will get the most out of the beautiful cards because you can't actually get any value out of them as game pieces, because Magic the Gathering is solvable. So ways to move forward, I would really like game designers to understand that this makes things easier. This gives you a path forward. This gives you standards. This gives you boundaries that allow you to not just make better games, but invent new genres. Like, we haven't seen everything yet. People think, oh, if it was possible, we would have seen it yet. Bullshit. I myself have invented at least 3 new genres of tabletop game since 2015. So there, like, it's not that difficult. And I would like to see game designers not just, be rightfully happy that this now exists, but really to push this as a standard, that when you have games that violate real game design, you create problems for your players. It creates industrial problems. You have to make everything artificial because now you're off the metrics. Now, you have to design cynically. Now you have to scam. Now you have to hustle. Now you have to lie. And now you're just putting up an illusion. You're selling the image of your game now, and the experience is Stockholm Syndrome for players. So I would also like to see players start realizing, wow, all these things that we put value in aren't actually worth anything. There are better games than Dungeons and Dragons. Dungeons and Dragons is a terrible game. Like, we should be exploring Palladium. We should be exploring GURPS. We should be checking out, World of Darkness. We should be checking out anything else. And then realizing too that those games also have a lot of problems. And maybe asking yourselves at that point as players, like, how do we fix it? Become the next generation of game designers that is dissatisfied with how much you've been scammed. Take the grand unified theory of game design and make what you want to see. And for current game designers who can put aside their pride, learn something new, and realize that it is the better way, I really hope you put out some amazing things. Here's the real big problem, though. We've been scammed for so many years, and people are so just riddled with Stockholm Syndrome, and people are so delusional that right now, many of these games amount to a multi-billion-dollar industry. I don't know what would happen if it collapsed. There is not a single real video game on the market. There is not a single real tabletop game on the market. I don't know what would happen if everybody realized this and stopped buying them. I don't know what would happen to collectors like Rudy, who have put millions and millions and millions of dollars, not just into sort of, the top crop, Magic the Gathering, and, I guess, I wouldn't call Pokemon top, but I guess I'm seeing that from a realist perspective. Pokemon is so much worse than Magic the Gathering, but he's invested not just in those kind of, top things that people recognize, but even down into things like Weiss and Force of Will. I don't know what would happen if the current trading card game market was correctly evaluated. I don't know if everything he owned would become worthless. I don't know if everything I hold for collectibles would be worthless. I don't know what would happen to local game stores. But I guess that would sort of be back to the Wild West. We'd have a lot of designers who, if anybody out there was smart and could put a game out quickly, a real game out, you know, maybe modify a previous design they had, fix it up, make it Grand Unified Theory compliant. Maybe they could get games quick enough to game stores, but I guess I'd have to see if a game could be as big as Magic the Gathering was when it first started out, because prior to that, game stores really kind of even didn't exist. It was more hobby stores. Like, I guess there were some game and toy stores, but the sports cards and hobby stores were kind of like a weird niche thing, and the concept of a Magic the Gathering, game store, because trading card games didn't exist before that, just didn't exist. So maybe after all the games leave game stores, maybe we'd have to all rally around another thing that came out. But I mean, if it was a video game, because that seems like the quickest thing to develop. If somebody put out a real video game and it gained traction, it wouldn't do anything for local game stores for tabletop games. But I mean, it could certainly be impactful in the industry. I hope Pawn Story Games puts that out. But I'm not doing any of this or putting any of this information out to have any of these effects. These really are all questions. They are not rhetorical. They are genuine. I don't know what's going to happen, but this is the correct fix. And I'm putting it out free. If anybody has any questions or anything they'd like me to explain further, if you question how hard these lines are, let me reiterate. If you violate any of these bullet points, you will end up with a not game. Period. Never take away a player's agency to participate. Give them full customization of strategy. Your game needs to be fair and balanced. It cannot be a simulation. It cannot be solvable. Victory cannot be random. These are not gray areas. These are not soft lines. These are absolute. And these culminate in a real game that could generate real collectible game assets, that could generate, successful video game franchises. Who knows, new genres, like I said. And I would like to see all of that. I don't want to see a huge uproar. I don't want to make people angry. Despite the fact that so many people in the game industry are made angry by this information, finding out that for the last 30 years, you've never designed a real game in your life. I mean, you could take that one way, or you could say, wow, let me just kind of take this in for a moment and see if I can apply any of it, test it out, and see what I like, Let me take these tools that I'm being given for free and let me put them to work, Let me try and prove Mark wrong. He's putting his money where his mouth is. He's putting this out. If I'm so angry about it, let me try and prove it wrong. Now, obviously, I think in your heart that that's going to be a fruitless effort. Because you can see the bullet points here, you can read them. And that would be a prideful endeavor. But I really hope you don't choose that. I really hope that if you're a designer out there, that this doesn't make you angry, that you realize that I am both a designer and a player who just wants to see better games. I'm not solving world hunger and telling no one. I realize this, and I'm putting this out there because it's important for everybody to have. And I'm not trying to make anyone angry. I'm just trying to make the world better. This is how I design games. This is how everyone needs to design games. And this is what players deserve. Yeah, again, if you have any questions, let me know. You can put them in the comments. You can email me. Do whatever you want. See you.